Salve, and welcome back to 15 with Fosca, the podcast. My guest today, Paola Vojnovic, is a true Renaissance woman. Here is our conversation about her Studiolo, her work as an art historian, and her life in Italy, sharing her infectious love of art and beauty with the world. Grazie mille e buon ascolto. Buongiorno, Mondo, and welcome back to 15 with Fosca, the podcast. I'm so happy to have with me today Paola Vojnovic, who has been a friend and a collaborator for more years than I care to count, but welcome, Paola.
Thank you, Pasca. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the invite.
I'm delighted that you're finally here. We've been working on this for a while, so it's sort of I think it's a miracle that actually we're finally sitting in the same room together and having this much anticipated chat, well, at least from my point of view.
Oh, I love it.
Yay! So for those who don't know you already, could you just give us a little bit about what you do and what brought you to Italy in the first place?
Yes, so I'll give you a short version.
Yeah.
I came to Italy in 2006 because I was one of the lucky recipients of the Syracuse University in New York, the Florentine Fellowship, which meant that I was able to come and study in Florence for a year to get my master's in Renaissance, Florentine Renaissance. And then they would actually ask some of the students to stay as teaching assistants, which meant that I got to teach and learn from some of the best Renaissance art historians of our time. And that kept me at Syracuse for 2 extra years. After that, I started teaching my own classes at some of the small American programs in Florence. And in 2010, I actually went to get my second master's from University of Siena. This time it was on management of cultural heritage. So it was a bit of a new window, let's say, on art history.
Exactly, which has now become much more popular.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay. So you were one of the pioneers.
It was really, really neat because at Syracuse we had work in the archives, and I was able to work with primary materials and really dig deep.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you in a bit how that kind of led to my job then in Florence. But in the University of Siena, the master's was a lot more about museums today and organizing exhibitions, working in a museum setting. And not only that, but some of our modules actually even included carabinieri coming from Sicily to talk to us about smuggling of the works of art.
How fascinating, though. What sort of a nice sort of omni-comprehensive type of program. So many different ways to look at museums, cultural spaces, art.
Especially in Italy.
Yeah.
And it was really, really interesting to kind of compare the American and European graduate school system.
Yeah.
They're very different, but I definitely benefited from both of them. In 2010, the program in Siena also meant that I had to intern somewhere to be able to actually work more in a museum setting. So I actually went to Serbia because I'm originally from ex-Yugoslavia, and my family moved to the States in 1995. So I was able to kind of go to the homeland and work a little bit there, which actually led to an idea to organize an exhibition in Florence of the copies of medieval frescoes. And it was kind of an interesting synchronicity because for my Syracuse graduate program, I actually did my research on the sacristy of Santa Croce. The Basilica of Santa Croce in Florence.
Destiny, right?
Yes, yes. So kind of these two loves kind of came together. And my thesis on the sacristy was published in Italian, which was really the great honor. And then that kind of led actually for me to work for the Basilica of Santa Croce, for Opera di Santa Croce, for about 10 years.
Yeah. And that's where we met.
Yes.
Because I used to send you interns from Stanford.
Yes.
And you were always like the internship mentor that I could count on to give my students the best experience. Seriously, I mean, the kids who interned with you were always so happy, just could not stop raving about you. So tell us more about, for those who don't know Florence well, Santa Croce is a huge deal. So can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to work inside such an immensely important landmark? It's become a museum, it's a basilica, but it's really a museum. What was it like working there for such a long time? Being a part of this incredible piece of Florentine history.
Yes. You know what's interesting? When I studied in Florence as an undergraduate in 1999.
I didn't know that.
Yes, I was at Arizona State University and I came to Florence for a month. And when I went back to the US, to Arizona, where my family lives, I thought, oh gosh, I have to come back. I have to find a way to go back to Italy. I loved it so much. And I actually bought a book called Living, Studying, and Working in Italy.
I bought that same book.
The book was amazing because this was the time, before the Google, before internet.
Right.
I was actually able to find in this book internship opportunities in Italy. And one of them was at the Guggenheim Museum in Venice.
Right. They have a great internship program still.
Yes, they do. And I applied. I sent a letter, a real mail letter. And I actually got the internship there in year 2000.
That's great.
So that is what brought me to Italy first time, long before I ever thought I would be going back to graduate school and, coming back with Syracuse. So I had a chance to be in the Guggenheim for 3 months in 2000. Anyway, many, many years later, as I was packing, I found this book that kind of changed my life. And what was the cover of the book? Basilica of Santa Croce.
I remember the book. Oh my gosh. I'm just like, I'm getting chills now because I remember that book. I actually think I probably bought it here in Florence at the Paperback Exchange.
Maybe. And I thought like the power of manifestation,
Right? Before manifestation was a thing.
Before I was manifesting, even back then. It was actually really amazing. So Santa Croce for me is a very special place because when I got to Syracuse, at my time in 2006, all of the colleagues, there's usually 4 or 5 students, we had to agree on a topic.
Oh.
So it was a bit of a challenge because sometimes people would come with very specific interests, but because the graduation really happens in Florence, a Syracuse seat in Florence, we have this symposium. So in my year, it happened to be the sacristies. And what a sacristy is, it's actually a very special, usually very small room in the church where the priest gets ready for Mass. So usually there's a lavabo where they wash their hands before they go out, and they dress there. So it's a very private space. In Florence, the sacristies turn out to be a very interesting patronage location as well, because they were a bit hidden, so it made them even more kind of exclusive, and the donors loved that. So my sacristy then, actually, what I ended up working on was the sacristy of Santa Croce. And it is an amazing experience because back in 2006, I was actually able to meet the Franciscan friars who were there. Many of them are no longer with us. One of them, especially Massimiliano Rosito, was this incredible Franciscan who basically lived in Santa Croce ever since the flood happened in 1966.
Unbelievable.
So he actually became a very, very good friend. And when I arrived to Syracuse, I didn't really know anyone in Florence. I had my group of colleagues at Syracuse.
Right.
And then, I would go to Santa Croce to do my research. And one day I was coming to see Padre Rosito because he was actually publishing this extraordinary magazine called Città di Vita. And it goes to all the big libraries in the world. Incredible publication, still coming out even in our times now. So as I was coming to see him, his office was actually underground in the catacombs of Santa Croce, and he had these big cats. So I see these big cats, and I thought, oh my gosh, I actually have a friend. I made a friend in this new city. I wanted to belong, so much. So I come to Padre and I tell him, as I saw him, I said, Padre, I really feel like we're friends, And he looked at me and he kind of opened his arms and he said, Paola, San Francesco accetta tutti.
Oh, I love that. I love
You want to
that.
translate?
Yeah, St. Francis accepts everyone,
Yes.
right? Or welcomes everyone.
Yes.
So beautiful. This is really, I mean, I think you've touched on, at least for me, the most fundamental thing about Santa Croce. You know, when we're talking about it, the first thing we do need to talk about is the Franciscans and their philosophy of life, etc. And I love what you just recounted as this sort of aha moment where you realize you have a friend, but for him, this is just normal Franciscan generosity, right?
Yes, yes. But you know, we became such good friends. I kept coming back, doing my research on the sacristy. And I remember one time coming to him, and I was just about to fly to the US.
Yeah.
And he said to me, it was his birthday, early December. He said, I have something for you. Please take this on the airplane with you. And he pulls out these cookies that were made by the nuns, where he would actually go and do a mass for them in Via San Giuseppe nearby to Santa Croce. And he said, you know, please, you're going to fly with these, okay? So he gives me a little plastic bag, you know. So I think these experiences will stay with me forever.
Always, yeah. And you were very fortunate, I think, to have all these, you know, these serendipitous encounters. So why did you stay? I mean, so you have a life back in Arizona.
Yes.
You have, you know, a potential life in Serbia as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you're living this life in Italy. And then, so what happens next? What's the thing that makes you say, okay, this is where I want to be?
I think, you know, it was really I just got to love the museum and the Franciscan family there, but also the museum, which is run by Opera di Santa Croce. And I think, you know, maybe just to also clarify what the opera is. It's actually, there used to be laymen associations that were actually building the churches in Florence in medieval times and Renaissance. So opera from operai, really the workmen.
Workers,
But now they're actually the nonprofit organizations that actually run the churches. So they're the ones that are selling the tickets, organizing visitor experiences, really run it as a museum. So for me, it was really the biggest privilege of my life to be able to work there, because I was able to organize another exhibition that was actually at the Ellis Island Museum in New York, because Santa Croce actually has one of the first statues of liberty. It was done by Pio Fedi, and it was this liberty of poetry. So that was really an incredible project to kind of talk about two cultures and what liberty means to us today. Yeah. And I think you were coming to Santa Croce at that time as well.
It's funny because we were definitely together. I think you were leading a group or something, and I was on that visit. And then you'll get a kick out of this. Don't ask me who it was, because I meet way too many people. But I recently ran into someone at an event, and your name came up, as it often does, because your name comes up all the time. And the person actually said to me that they had been at that exhibit.
Yes. Wow.
I can't remember who it was now, but it'll come to me. And I was like, oh, I remember Paola organizing that exhibit. Yes. And I remember all of the whole backstory. I remember all the fundraising, the crowdfunding. It was a huge deal for you. It was really one of those, moments in your career where things really come together. And I think that was a very critical moment for you. I remember it quite well. It took up a lot of time and energy, but it brought some wonderful results with it. It sort of increased the visibility of the basilica, what kind of treasures it has, and and then of course things changed. That was when 2010, you said. So much has changed, in the past however many years, but I remember that being just such a huge project, and it was just so funny that the other day I ran into somebody who was there, and I thought, wow, I got to tell Paola when I see her about that.
The exhibition at the Ellis Island was actually, it took about, several years to organize it all, but it happened in 2019, so just before the pandemic.
Exactly, just
which is kind
pandemic.
of like, it was also kind of cut into the duration of the exhibition, of course, because the world, changed and closed. But the fundraising part of my job there was one of the biggest privileges I feel, to be able to fundraise and implement some new fundraising techniques and styles. That was, now it's a bit more of a common thing in museums, but back then it was kind of like a pioneering ground We were actually the first ones to do a crowdfunding Kickstarter campaign for the loggia of the Pazzi Chapel, and the Florentine, the amazing team of the Florentine helped out, and it was quite an extraordinary experience.
It was
actually.
a great campaign. I remember the slogan was
Crazy for Pazzi.
Crazy for Pazzi, because Pazzi in Italian means crazy.
Yes.
The Pazzi family.
Yes.
And it was that I remember that very well. It was well publicized. So
Yes.
you did a very good job with that.
It was amazing, and I also just to have, more than 800 donors from around the world coming together to make it happen. So I think when a project like that comes together and there's this enthusiasm of a team that was working in the opera and a great collaboration we had with the Florentine, that was kind of the secret recipe, because after that, many other crowdfunding campaigns were launched, but it didn't have the same success. Yeah. So I think it's also a matter of, hard work, preparation, but also just sometimes pure luck.
I think so too, yeah. And it was a particular time, and I think for some reason, I also think that Santa Croce is really beloved. A lot of places in Florence, I think people are often surprised, but a lot of what we see around us, if you're walking around Florence and you notice, if you stop and read the fine print, you can see, what philanthropist donated, to have that work restored, or who. So a lot of the upkeep involved in these immense structures that are really a patrimony for everyone in the world. Everyone should be able to see Santa Croce. Everyone should be able to see the Pazzi Chapel. I think what we sometimes don't realize is that it requires a lot of money to keep those places alive and to keep them in wonderful shape and to pay restorers and to, it's a lot of work and a lot of money. And sometimes we don't realize that it is thanks to those lovers of these, of Florence, of these spaces, that we can have them for ourselves, but also for, visitors for centuries to come.
It's true. It's our obligation, in Renaissance, the big families that were making these structures, actually helping to have them built and to exist, were the kind of the original patrons. But now it's up to us to keep going.
Exactly.
I think Florence is very lucky, as is Venice, and of course other Italian cities that are really just beloved by the people from around the world. Here I'm talking about those who are coming and staying for a few weeks or months in the city, not just the mass tourism, unfortunately, but really the those that love Italy and that are big donors, mostly from the U.S. I think fundraising and really giving back to the community is such an American concept.
Is. It's very much ingrained in us to be philanthropists, to give back, even if we just have a little.
Yes.
Even if you can only give a little.
Yes.
Every little bit helps, know? And so, but having that understanding that something like art really does belong to us all.
Yes.
And to also recognize, and we'll talk a little bit more about over-tourism later, but also to recognize the kind of wear and tear that these places are subject to. And so if, they're only, the resources that the Italian government has are limited.
In many cases, the government doesn't even, helps the museums.
Exactly.
It's actually in their hands now. And, 30, 40 years ago, the noble families of Florence, it was enough for them just to come together over Christmas lunch and make a plan what new altar they will restore. Right. Those days are gone.
Yeah.
So I think there is a lot more now of kind of looking to the U.S., seeing how Americans do it. Because, of course, many museums in Italy have the entry fee. One of the things I learned when I went to University of Siena for this master's was that the only museum in Italy that actually can cover their expenses with the entrance ticket cost is Colosseum in Rome.
I never would have guessed that.
Well, imagine there is really nothing there. It's just there's no need for air conditioning, lighting, and stuff like that. So all the other museums do depend on that budget coming from somewhere else.
Yeah. It's fundamental.
Even the Louvre, the French government is actually subsidizing a lot of its costs and too. So it's a huge deal, and these museums, they do belong to everyone. And I just, I would encourage everyone who is listening to this episode to really find a way to support the local economy.
Thank you for saying that. It's
Yes.
something I say a lot on the podcast, because it's something I pay a lot of attention to. And unfortunately, Florence, Venice, we could talk, most Italian cities do have this. It's a recurring issue. It's not, the upkeep is not something, it's not like you can do it now and then we can do it 20 years from now. We're dealing with stuff that's centuries old, some things that are in very delicate condition. There are places, that are still on long lists that need to be, paintings to be restored, spaces to be somehow, updated and refurbished. So there's always something to do, and we can all do our part. I think beyond even buying that museum ticket, which now we know doesn't cover the cost of of operating the museums. I want to fast forward a little because we got up to 2019, just before the pandemic. It feels like a good time for us to move into what the next chapter of your life then was and is. So what happens after, the Santa Croce, you do all the fundraising, the big exhibit at Ellis Island.
Yes. And then I realized I wanted to try something else. I realized I wanted to see if I can work for myself.
Okay.
And what that would look like, because I think I have a very independent spirit. And sometimes I have too many pots on the burners.
I wouldn't know anything about that. I don't know anything about having too many pots on the burners.
I think so many women, relate to that. So as I was kind of going into this, new uncharted territory, the world closed with the pandemic. And one day I realized so many of my clients over the years on the tours, lovely people I got to meet from all really walks of life, reached out to me and to see where I am, what is happening in Italy. Of course, the world knew how bad the situation here was in 2020, and I realized, let me do something for these lovely clients. Some of them I might have met 10 years earlier, but when people come to Italy and they have one tour guide, they really connect, and you kind of stay with them, right? You're part of their trip, you're part of their experience.
Absolutely. And someone like you, who's so knowledgeable, but so lovely, so open, so,
Thank you.
You really, I think I can see why people love you so much. So they reached out, seeing the situation was really bad in Italy. I say it a lot. I think it's really hard for people who weren't here to understand, because it wasn't like that at all in the United States.
Yes.
And
yes, exactly.
At all. And when I went to the States, I was shocked, because I was like, what? Nobody's wearing a mask, And so you have this outpouring of love.
So people are, coming and reaching out. And then I realized, okay, let me do something to kind of lift everyone's spirits. How about if I talk about one of the paintings by Leonardo, the only Leonardo painting in the US, which is Ginevra da Benci.
Right.
And
at the National Gallery.
At the National Gallery. I still haven't seen Ginevra in person, but she kind of became my muse in a way. And I said, okay, maybe we can do this. Why don't we just meet together and spend one Saturday night talking about beautiful work of art? And I thought this would be my contribution to the world, let's say. I will just do something hopefully interesting for others. And that Ginevra lecture then all of a sudden led to people writing to me asking if I could do this again. And that is how Paola's Studiolo was born. I thought it would have been just something that was a short time while the world was kind of on hold. But the Studiolo lectures continue on even today. And I think it's one of the most exciting projects, really, that I'm working on, because the idea of Studiolo is actually a Renaissance concept.
Mm-hmm. Explain it to us a little more. Explain the concept of Studiolo and also what Paola's Studiolo consists of.
Okay. So the Studiolo was a special room in Renaissance palazzi all over Italy, the noble men, sometimes noble women as well, would kind of have their own little study room where they would hang beautiful works of art or have some coins or collections, specific collections, and only specific number of people would be invited in. So if you went to Urbino, you would have maybe seen the palace, but maybe not everyone got to go into those doors.
Okay.
So it was a really special room, and this is kind of the room where you retrieve from the world to learn and meditate and contemplate, right?
Lovely.
So I thought, gosh, this is wonderful. I have my little studiolo. It's a virtual. I cannot really hang any works of art on the wall, but it's really a place where we meet and talk about interesting things, like really connected to the Renaissance and Italian culture in general.
Right. So you start Paola Studiolo, and you start sort of with a little core group who are tuning in via Zoom. So you did the first one on Ginevra,
Yes.
and everyone's like, this is wonderful.
Yes.
And you decide slowly but surely to continue.
Yes.
Now, first, was it on your own and then you started inviting guests, or was it always because those couple of years you and I lost touch because you left Florence and the pandemic was going on and whatever. And then all of a sudden, when we all reemerged, you had Paola Studiolo. So how did it evolve, and how has it evolved over the past? It's been 4 years now.
Yes,
almost
it's been
5.
4 years. It's interesting. In the beginning, it was really just lectures that I did on Renaissance art. But then I started, one of the first guests, actually, the idea was Ross King.
I love Ross.
The incredible scholar whose best-selling book, Brunelleschi's Dome, I think everyone has it in their library.
Yeah.
So Ross, we started talking about the pandemic and what's happening, and we thought, okay, why don't I do an interview? And I asked Ross 5 questions, like what is the most underestimated artist of Renaissance? And that's really, really neat. So that first interview with Ross actually then launched the interview series. And I'm now basically on the 87th interview. So it's been an incredible collection of museum directors, curators, authors, researchers on Renaissance. It's been really a great privilege to be able to contact the scholars I love, invite them in, and just speak about their topics of research. What is interesting about Studiolo is that most of my audience is older. They're 65 and older, which I think is a lovely group. Many of them have never been exposed to the Renaissance studies before. And I get these emails almost every week saying, how much these Studiolo sessions mean to them. Now when they come back to Italy, they actually have a notebook of notes.
Like a solid knowledge base, you know? And I don't know if you know this. I don't know if I've told you this before, but I prepare for my clients sort of my little general guide to Italy with my insider information. But I recommend Paola's Studiolo.
Okay.
And that's exactly the reason why I do it, because I don't want to tell people just about how to change money or how museums work or public transportation. I want people to have a solid educational base when they come to Italy. I want their eyes to be a little more prepared for what they're going to see. And I find Paola Studiolo is fantastic for that also, because you can just go, you can say, oh, wait, I saw you recently did this thing on makeup.
Yes.
And I missed it because my Wi-Fi went out for 6 days, but that's another story. But I really wanted to see it. So there really is, you touch on such a wide variety of subjects within sort of the greater field of the Italian Renaissance, and call on all these wonderful speakers and have these illuminating conversations about art, which honestly, I feel like there's a big need for today.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
Beauty.
One thing, I thank you for recommending the Studiolo to your esteemed clientele.
I love doing it.
I think what's, one of the art historians, he wrote, and he actually said, we love what we know. Gombrich said this. So it's really true. Once you get to scratch the surface and you study these works of art and the artists who made them, then when you see them in person, you have a whole different experience.
Absolutely.
And seeing them in Florence, where you see them in situ, where their creators intended them to be, it's a whole different experience, really, in our lifetime. So I think that is where the allure of Florence lies: the idea that we can still walk the city and maybe know these hidden corners that we can stop in and really stand in a place, maybe where someone like Domenico Ghirlandaio stood, studying the light in the chapel in Santa Trinita, to understand, okay, where do I position my fresco and things like that.
And you really, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, when first of all, it's a question of accessibility as well. Not everyone can just come to Florence, and
True.
so having,
Yes.
or Venice or wherever. So also having that experience, right? That intellectual experience of, okay, well, I might not be going now, but
Yes.
maybe in a year I'll be able to go or what have you. But it also speaks to something that I'm so committed to as well, which is just lifelong learning. Also, I think as a way to maybe counteract some of the sort of violent over tourism we're experiencing right now.
Yes.
And I'd like to talk about that with you.
Yes.
Because you left Florence.
Yes.
Which I, I liked having you here, but it's okay. But you left Florence. You come back, of course, but now you're living elsewhere.
Yes.
But as I'm sure you know, because you come here often enough to see the city every season, basically, it's not like it was.
Yes, I think pandemic was a turning point, wasn't
really
it?
was, yeah.
I think in terms of my work, before the pandemic, you would always imagine that I would be in Uffizi or in San Marco talking about works of art. Now we have the incredible Zooms, and we can visit places virtually from the comfort of our own home, which I think is a really, really wonderful asset. And I decided to go actually live on the seaside in Tuscany because I love it. There's something for me, I could literally every day go for sunset and be completely happy.
I know.
But I think it was actually it's a good balance because my life is so busy.
Yeah.
And kind of that keeps me, I guess, maybe in balance, really. But yes, I don't really miss living in Florence. That's the interesting part. I come back all the time, of course.
I know you're always here for your work, for everything.
For my friends and things like that. But I think it's good to be in a place where there is still actually a lovely local life. And I found that in Viareggio, where we still have the fruit guy who comes in 3 times a week on his little truck, and he has a microphone and he announces what he has. And I can just go downstairs and pick from his truck what fruits I want and vegetables. I think that is part of Italy that is kind of the ones we all fell in love with.
Yeah. And I was just reflecting on that literally like a day or two ago, walking around Florence and thinking about what it was that first made me fall in love. And I think it's those sort of miraculous encounters that you were talking about, your relationship with the frate at Santa Croce, your relationship with your fruttivendolo. For me, it was a lot of it was just the beauty. I was just overwhelmed by the beauty, but a lot of it was also that I met a lot of Italians. As a young person, I think about sort of my first time in Florence as a student. So very much like your first experience, I don't really think I met any other Americans. I mean, not because they weren't here, but I didn't want to, but I also didn't have to. And I think that now, I mean, the pandemic turning point was that now everyone wants to come to Italy all of a sudden, right?
Yes.
But they don't want to come to Paola's Italy or Fosca's Italy, although thankfully enough do. But, you and I, not only you and I, but a lot of us are going up against these really damaging, sort of inaccurate images of what life in Italy is like and sort of what the priorities here are. So if I was thinking about it literally the other day, I was like, okay, I fell in love with Florence because there was something about the magic, right, of the place, the beauty, all the beauty everywhere. It was like, it just filled my soul. It fed something in me that I didn't even know I needed. But then it was also those encounters, the
Yes.
generosity of Italians,
Yes.
the openness,
Yes.
even Florentines who don't have a very good reputation.
Yes.
But now, Paola, everyone's just in a bad mood all the time.
I know.
You know?
I know. My sister-in-law came to visit me from Arizona with her little 5-year-old, my nephew.
Yeah.
And she took him out, in Viareggio, she took him out to a playground. And the lady who owns a little train stop, little children's train, like little mini Disneyland. My sister-in-law told me, Paula, she's so unprofessional. She just kept kissing my son on his head, saying, amore, amore.
Italians love babies.
They do.
They love kids.
They do.
They love kids. And that was another thing that I think, at least, from my point of view, staying here, deciding to stay here, having a child here, etc., was something also that was very refreshing, right?
Yes.
That there at least was this humanity, very strong humanity.
Yes. So, how do we, you were saying earlier, people come to Fosca's Italy or Paula's,
Right.
or Florence, but that Florence is no longer there. It's still there. The beauty of all these monuments is there, but I think the world has changed so much. And I wonder, if you or I, if we are to be now undergraduate students coming to Florence for the first time.
I don't know.
What that experience would have been, it would be very, very different.
I don't know. And it's because of that, actually, that I work so hard with my clients, with lifelong learners. And that's something I wanted to applaud that you're doing, is that you are engaging people in this process of lifelong learning, which is so important.
Yes.
But also, I think knowledge is always power. So I try to give my clients, I try to say to them, listen, I know it's not, not everyone can do it, but if people can, come between, October and March, or don't just go to Florence, but think about maybe visiting those towns
Smaller
that are
places.
Spectacular,
Yes.
that are literally a train stop away, like nobody goes to Arezzo. Why?
Yes.
Those Piero della Francescas are unbelievable. Yes, go to Venice, but also pop over to Treviso, Verona, whatever. And so I think, I don't know that I would have fallen in love with Florence the way I did many years ago. No.
Yes.
Because but who knows, right? But it feels different. Yeah.
I think it's the responsibility is in all of us. I feel if people are coming to Italy to visit, I think doing a little bit of research beforehand, thinking, okay, what can be maybe an unknown destination, really. I remember my dad coming to visit me one time. He was a painter and loved Italy. Florence gave him a lot. Right away he became, in my own neighborhood, he became pittore. They just absolutely loved him. And I think that sense of community was crucial for his last years of his life.
I'm so happy to hear that.
I know, it was unbelievable. But my dad would sometimes say, let's go to a train station. And he said, let's pick the train, next train going, next destination.
I love that.
Just an hour from here. Yeah. Because we were just there. We wanted to get out of the town.
Right.
And I think this is how I first time saw Livorno.
The
train was going to Livorno, and so let's do that.
Right.
And it was like,
and nobody
beautiful.
Nobody goes to Livorno. I mean, we go to Livorno. Locals go to Livorno.
Yes.
Livorno is phenomenal,
Yes.
Yes. And so I love that, because what it does is and now that's more necessary than ever, because it's very hard to navigate the city of Florence these days, and to really be able to, when you were talking about your Studiolo, and you were talking about the idea of a Studiolo, I also think about that sort of sacred space that a museum is, or a church, where you can have a relationship with the work of art in front of you. In other words, you can be there contemplating it, have a dialogue with it, observe it. It's really hard to do that now. Yes. There's a lot of interference,
but I think not only interference, yes, but I think also just the way we are now connected in so many ways, but I think lonelier than ever. Yeah. We're on our phones constantly, and I see it everywhere, everywhere you go now. And I think maybe, traveling now maybe means slowing down, actually, and planning not to visit 3 cities in a week, but maybe just one, and really get to know it better find your own coffee place where you can go
I
every
know.
morning,
Right.
disconnecting a bit. But I think that will be the secret, will be the way that we disconnect and just spend time
Yeah.
with ourselves, hopefully with beautiful works of art to inspire us and touch our soul. And I think that needs time. And I think that we have to protect that.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that. This is something that, it's a hot topic right now. Paola and I are recording. It's in September. This episode will come out in the new year. But this was the summer of over tourism and locals getting very upset about feeling like their homes are no longer their homes, right? Italians are very loving in general. They're very grateful for tourism, very, I think, open to pretty much every visitor is welcome, but it's gotten to a point where it's really we're at a breaking point. You spend a lot of time in Venice, and you and I do similar things in that we're trying to show people how much there is in this country and to prepare people. I always say the podcast, I try to prepare people so that they travel through Italy in a mindful and contemplated way with that knowledge that they can get from Paola's Studiolo, that they can get before they come to understand the impact that not just their presence has, but just sort of like the multitudes have in a city like Venice, which is an example to the extreme, but a city like Florence, which is also getting there. So how do you, as someone who not only do you teach through your Studiolo, you are a guide, you do a million things. Do you see any kind of possible solution to this problem, or what is there something else we can be doing to combat this kind of, it's not just the over tourism, I think a lot of it is the disrespectful tourism.
Yes. Ziti, I have spent a lot of time in Venice this year. I actually was there quite a bit. Well, pretty much most of the year was actually in Venice. The big difference between Florence and Venice is that for me, there is still kind of a local sense in Venice. There is less Venetians now than ever, less than 48,000. This summer, they actually hit that horrible milestone where there's actually more beds for tourists than for the residents. Like more people sleep in Venice than that are actually real Venetian.
I read that, yeah.
But what makes Venice so special is that sense of community you have, because you have to walk everywhere. Yeah. You cannot hide in your car.
No.
Or you jump on the Vaporetto, the city bus. And let's say you're going to the opera. If you're on the Vaporetto, you know exactly who on the Vaporetto is going to be getting off the same stop and going to the La Fenice with you.
That's so funny.
So to me, that was really refreshing. In Florence, we don't have, we kind of lost that idea of, yes, the neighborhood still exists, but in Venice, somehow it feels like a small,
like
village,
a small town. Because it really is.
It is.
It
actually.
really is.
So to go back to your question, what can we do? I think for sure visiting off season,
if it's possible. I know.
If it's possible.
I know it's not always possible.
Yes. So I think visiting off season is really one of the best things to plan on to kind of get that local feel. Mm-hmm. One of the trips I do now annually to Venice actually is for the Carnevale, because I was living in Italy for probably a good 12 years before I actually went to Venice to experience Carnevale for myself, because everyone was telling me, do not bother, it's a crazy time to go.
I know, people always said the same thing to me too.
Exactly. But then I finally went one year and I realized, oh my gosh, as long as you move away from the San Marco,
right.
And Rialto, the city is actually there, kind of asleep. So I started going there for myself, and then friends started asking me to join, and now this has been a third year of the Venice Carnevale experience, where I try to really use the chance to visit special places in the city during the week, because during Carnevale, the hits comes
on the weekend. There are a lot of day trippers. Yeah, yes. There come in a lot of I mean, US students, for example, who study here in Florence, my
Yes.
students at Stanford would always go to
Yes.
Carnevale,
Yes.
to Venice for Carnevale.
Yes.
So, what does the trip entail? Tell us a little bit about what the trip involves.
So I try to involve the people that I absolutely admire and love in Venice.
Okay.
So I try to have them open the doors of their palazzi to us.
Yay!
My dear friend Mimi, who lives in the Grand Canal, always hosts our first dinner. And then I invite incredible experts who are Venetian to come and talk to my small group of travelers. For example, this year I had Venetian art historian Carlo Corsato, who works at the National Gallery in London.
Yeah.
He flew in just to spend a day with us.
How wonderful.
And we had this one day of slow art, looking really at works of art
Phenomenal.
through his eyes, looking at Titians in their original setting.
Yeah.
So I really try to make it an experience. And every day when my group is there, I just hear them always say, how do we even explain this trip to our friends? What do we even say? Where do we start from? I think that is also what the goal is, right?
Yeah.
To make it something special and unique. And I really try to call on the people whose work I admire, who I know have so much to offer, because really, what is the soul of the city? It's the people who dwell in it, right?
Yeah.
So that is what is really special about Florence, and of course anywhere we are, right?
Yeah. I love that as a model too, because it really is more like a seminar. It's not a trip.
Yes.
It's not, it's something that becomes, I think perhaps that's why the people who participate in it have difficulty defining it.
Yes.
Because it's so different from your average experience if you would be in Venice for a week or Florence for a week or whatever. You're really having them not only exposed to you and to other expert art historians, and you're having, people's homes are opened up to them. So they're having these very rarefied experiences, once in a lifetime. And those are the things that for me always stick in my head about Italy. We get back to those, it's hard to explain the magic.
Yes.
Right? And so you're giving them the magic. And unfortunately, it's hard for the magic of Venice not to come through.
True.
However, a lot of people don't love Venice because of, the logistical challenges, the big crowds, etc. And so what a shame, right? What a tragedy. So I think bringing in a group of, I really look at it as a group of students, lifelong learners. We go back to that. So I'm trying to do that through my work, and I see clearly that you're doing that through your work as well. And so hopefully if enough of us, get together and let people know that there is this Italy, this that's here, and there are these people who can guide you, to these wonderful discoveries. And it doesn't just have to be unless it has to be, because I recognize that people don't have a lot of vacation, and I recognize that people have limits and children in school and things like that. And if you only have a week, it's obvious that you want to see Venice, Rome, Florence, and whatever. But that experience will be very different from the experience that your groups are having, that they can't even put into words because it's so spectacularly different, right?
I think what also is maybe one advice for the travelers who cannot maybe sign up for a trip that is 5 or 6 days long, or maybe use your planning services to make it really exceptional. I think one piece of advice would be to hire a local guide, even just for 3 hours.
I agree.
And
even
have
just
that
a
local
walking tour, absolutely.
just a walking tour with a local who can share what the city is all about. Or many of the Italian museums actually also offer their own tours done by the people who work in the specific museum, and they sometimes even take us kind of behind the scenes. And I think if people just look at the website and look to see what are the tours offered, I think those kind of behind the scenes experiences are really spectacular. Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, for example, has it, or Ducal Palace in Venice. So I think there is also a way to make it as unique on any budget.
Absolutely.
I think just a little bit of planning.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Instagram has so many now lovely places that are top 10 things to visit.
Right.
Of course, there will be a million other people there.
I know.
But I think maybe also waking up early in the morning.
Yeah.
That is when the city really comes
Is
alive.
yours.
It's really yours.
Yeah.
I think until about 9 o'clock in the morning, people can do a lot
Absolutely.
of exploration just if they can do that one morning.
Right. And the thing is, walking around Italian cities, there's so much beauty everywhere.
Yes.
You don't even need to go into
Yes.
a museum or a church.
Yes.
If you can really, it saddens me when I speak to people who've gone so quickly through Florence and Venice and whatever, that they can't even really verbalize what they've seen.
Yes.
So I always recommend exactly what you do, which is, slow down. Even if you have to do the marathon, right? Milan, Rome, Venice, Florence, slow down just a little bit, and maybe see one less thing, but see it well.
Yes.
And it's hard to strike that balance as travelers. I mean, I'm a crazy traveler. Like, ask any family member, you do not want to be traveling with me because I walk way too much. I sleep very little, and I'm very ambitious. And I know that not everyone likes that speed of travel, but I even though I do that, I'm very selective in what I see and how I see it. And one of the things I always do in a new city is I do go on a local walking tour. I'll usually choose something like a food tour or, whatever. It doesn't matter, but just so that I can feel, that just to get that insider information, and just to get, even if it is just 3 hours of my time, but usually it'll set the tone for my entire trip, but it'll give me all that background information too, because even if you're just doing something which might seem frivolous, like a food tour, you learn so much about a country, a city, people. And so...
Especially in Italy.
Well, if you do a food tour in Italy, we started... off mic, we began talking about pecorino cheese, and now it's lunchtime, and so I'm getting absolutely starving. I want to ask you just a couple of more things as we come to the end of our conversation, which is unbelievable. First of all, we're going to put all of your links in the show notes so that anyone who wants to participate in the Studiolo, sign up for one of your wonderful trips, get to know you better, they know where to go.
Thank you.
In the meantime, I want to know what's in store for you.
Thank you.
If you can talk about it.
Yes.
And want to talk about it, but any exciting plans for the immediate future?
Yes. So actually, just tomorrow, I begin my program with Ross King on Brunelleschi and Michelangelo in Florence with 11 lovely travelers who will join us.
Perfect size.
So it is really an honor for me to be able to do this with someone whose work I admire so much. And then the Studiolo sessions this year are quite incredible. I have the curator of the new show at the Metropolitan Museum on the Sienese art. Catherine Campbell is coming from the National Gallery of Ireland to talk about the show she curated. And then later on in the year, Frances Mees will come to talk about living under the Tuscan sun.
I don't want to miss that one.
Yes,
I have to. That's going to be amazing.
Because I think, in Frances's work, so much of it is about the idea of home and where we belong. And sometimes I actually read one wonderful interview with her, and she said, sometimes our home can actually just be our suitcase.
Yeah.
And what we have there and where we are going. I think that's actually probably where we both feel at home.
I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, I wrote a recent blog about, I was back in the States and I know you're heading back now.
Yes.
And I wrote this little entry about how I always feel displaced or misplaced or, and I don't know where home is.
Yes.
I really don't know, Paola, because I feel at home in a bunch of places, thankfully, but I also always feel kind of not at home.
Yes.
And I like this notion of finding home even in an inanimate object. So, but it's not puzzling to me. It's been on my mind a lot lately, sort of the notion of home, identity, even
Yes.
also in light of what we've been talking about, the way Italy has changed,
Yes. Yes. For me, that is a much more complex topic because, of course, the homeland where I was born, ex-Yugoslavia, doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
And to have your country taken away from you, that is probably one of the most devastating losses a human being can experience in their
I
lifetime.
can't even imagine.
So for me, the kind of the sense of home and is really home is where I am, and home is in a suitcase, really. But this year, what is really special, as we talk about plans for 2025, I'm actually planning a very special program with Sarah Winman, who wrote a book, Still Life.
Yeah, I know the book.
It is about this really the period of time between the Second World War and the Great Flood of Florence in '66, and kind of this idea of home and this Englishman coming to Florence and finding a home and a community in Santo Spirito. So we are planning that trip for November of 2025. So I think it's interesting because the main character in the book, as you well know, is actually a globe maker.
Yeah.
So to think about, our maps and our world. And of course, I was talking to a very good friend about this just in Venice because we met one of the last globe makers from Italy, this young man, Leonardo Frigo. And this friend of mine, Dwayne, was saying how actually each one of us has our own globe that on it doesn't have every country and every capital of the world, but actually just has places important to you.
I love that.
So we all have our own private geography.
Yeah.
And for some people, they're blessed to have that globe filled with lovely spots around the world. For some people, we both know it's just one spot, maybe Florence or Venice, and they have not explored much, but their world is there and they're comfortable in that setting. So I think we are all immigrants, we're all travelers, especially in the world today. And I think our job is to make those travels, no matter how big or small, as interesting as possible, as enriching for our soul as we can.
Exactly.
For our soul, our mind. Because this is, I think, the only way for us to really exist in this modern world where we are bombarded with so much. I think carving our own internal space, but that kind of our own personal geography.
I love that.
I think that is our mission today.
Yeah. Wow. I don't want to end our conversation, but I can't think of a better way to end it because we've been talking this whole time about, traveling in an informed way, about sort of mapping out your own course, finding your places, and the idea of this internal geography that we all carry with us. Francis Mays's idea of the suitcase as even representing home. I often feel, as I'm sure you do, that I'm always running. I'm always living at least between two countries and cultures, but often in my life, I'm just running, right?
Yes.
So it might be my suitcase, but it might also just be my little tote bag that has all my podcasting equipment in it or whatever. But I do think we've touched on so many interesting and thought-provoking topics today about just what it is to be a human being in the world right now. And I think what you're giving with your Studiolo is you're giving people comfort, company, and knowledge, which is a beautiful combination. And I think I would actually hazard to say a necessary combination to sort of get through the exhausting nature of our modern world, right? It's almost like, and I'm going to end here, but there's this beautiful Italian expression, rifarsi gli occhi. No?
Love it.
It's just one of those untranslatable Italian expressions, but literally like to look at something with totally new eyes, or to rifarsi gli occhi means to see something beautiful, right?
Yes.
And so I think about that a lot because, and I mentioned it briefly during the maybe a few minutes ago or at the beginning of the recording, but now more than ever in this speed driven, whatever, money driven, Instagram, social driven world that we live in, it does become that much more unique to be able to sit in a room, whether that be a virtual room or a room like the one we're sitting in now, and have really good conversations about the important things, right?
Yes.
Beauty, art, friendship, community, knowledge. So I don't know how to thank you for what you're doing in terms of really enriching people's lives with the work that you do. And thank you for creating a beautiful community for people who love Italy and who love to talk about art and to learn.
Thank you, Pascal, for having me. It was such a great privilege to sit here with you and to see your shining eyes as we discuss these topics. And so I really admire what you have created and what you're doing. And I hope that this podcast will reach the people who need to hear this, and that they maybe will have something, one little bit of information that will enrich their life in a good and positive way.
Yeah.
That is probably the biggest privilege of what we get to do, right?
Exactly.
To touch
No,
people's
we're
lives.
really lucky.
Yes.
And so my goal, and I think it's yours as well, is to share some of that love, right?
Yes.
And to share our Italy,
Yes.
Our very special
Yes.
Italy with people out there, even if it just means that one painting that they get to see or that one little off the beaten track. You know, who knows what exactly. The important thing is that there are still incredible authentic experiences to be had here if you have the right guide, if you will.
Yes, and the right mindset to look for that.
Brava, exactly.
Yes.
And the openness, I think,
Yes.
to see it, right? To see sort of beyond the simulacrum, you know, to see beyond what the representation of Italy is right now. Grazie mille.
Grazie a te, Oscar. And best of luck with your venture.
Grazie mille. Sono molto contenta. Alla prossima volta.
A huge thank you to Paola Vojnovic for coming on the podcast and to everyone for tuning in. I'm planning to attend all of Paola's upcoming Studiolos, and I really hope you will too. While I have you here, I'd like to remind local folks that I'll be leading a workshop along with my podcast guests and friends over at La Clit, and we'll be doing that at Il Conventino on Saturday morning, March 22nd. We would love to have you with us, so check out our socials or DM me for more information. Grazie mille e alla prossima volta.